The Ynnead have had a checkered history. Since first appearing at the end of 7th edition, oscillating wildly between being ultra-potent and borderline irrelevant, depending on just what level of bullshit their rules allow them to operate at. Aeldari players dream, in particular, of a glorious return to the days of early to mid 8th edition, where extra actions via Strength from Death let the Ynnead terrorize all before them. They had several additional moments in the Sun since, mostly revolving around the Incarn's ability to be a proper menace in 9th and 10th edition. A new Aeldari Codex brings with it a new set of rules for the Ynnead, and after some time off, the rule studio dedicated to make a new pass at creating a fixed incarnation of a Soul Burst style mechanic, which combines with the Battle Focus army rule to create a uniquely reactive and lightning fast attachment that will utterly eviscerate the unprepared. Is it a return to the boring 8th edition double shoot nonsense? No. Is it plausibly the most powerful thing in a very powerful book anyway? Yeah, but it's got some stiff competition. There are costs to playing Ynnead, but the rewards you can reap are spectacular, and this detachment gives you options unlike anything else in the current game. In the hands of top players, this is going to be a whirlwind of destruction. Thanks to Games Workshop for providing a preview copy of these rules for review purposes. If you'd like to read more, head on over to goonhammer.com. Link in the description. Detachment Rule, Servants of the Whispering God. This is a twofer. You can include Ynnead units in your army, even though they do not have the Asuryani faction keyword. Asuryani units, excluding epic heroes, gain the Ynnead keyword. You must include Yvraine and or the Incarn, and one of them has to be your warlord. They also have a trio of Strength from Death rules. Lethal Intent. At the end of the opponent's shooting phase, if one or more Ynnead units from your army was destroyed that phase, pick a non-Titanic Ynnead unit to make a normal move. Lethal Surge. Once per turn, when a Ynnead unit from your army does a fadeback agile maneuver, it can make a lethal surge instead of a normal move, going d6 plus 1 inches, and it can move into engagement range of the enemy unit which triggered the maneuver. Lethal Reprisal. At the start of the fight phase, pick a non-Titanic Ynnead unit below its starting strength to gain the fight's first ability. This detachment gains access to a smattering of reskinned Drukhari units who have the Ynnead keyword, as well as the full complement of Eldar you'd expect. There's no keywords for Harlequins though. The days of the Ynarlequin are over. Leading your force will be Yvraine or the Incarn, still one of the dumbest puns in the game, who are both excellent datasheets. Most importantly, dying is good again. The 3 Strength from Death abilities can help you provide relentless pressure turn after turn. Lethal Intent providing a full normal move, none of that d6 nonsense, gives you a ton of mobility, getting onto objectives for the following turn or just getting out of a bind. It's particularly good in your transports, Shining Spears, and the Incarn. Lethal Surge keeps the pressure on, and can especially help your Howling Banshees or the Incarn keep the foe tied down. Finally, Lethal Reprisal lets you pick a unit, excluding Titanic, that's below starting strength to gain fight first at the beginning of each fight phase. Broken record here, but this is also pretty good in the Incarn, since they only have to lose a single wound to do it, and it's also fun with Archon and Incubi units, as if they're below starting strength, they'll have full wound rerolls as well. These are great. Lethal Intent is what holds it all together, but the other 2 abilities complement it nicely, helping maximize the number of bad or risky choices an opponent has to make at any given time. Your fragile unit of elves may be a tempting target for your opponent, unless killing them means you get to score 4 to 5 free victory points on the following turn by surging onto an objective. The enhancements are probably the weakest part of this detachment, but that doesn't mean there aren't some decent ones. Gaze of Ynnead gives a Farseer's Eldritch Storm the Devastating Wounds ability. The Farseer offers one of the very few ways in this book that you can still flip a guaranteed 6 on a Devastating Wounds attack as long as they're leading a unit, and sticking a Farseer in a Defender unit with this seems like a high-value harassment tool. Storm of Whispers upgrades a Warlock so that after they shoot in your shooting phase, one enemy unit that they hit has to take a Battleshock test. It's cheap, unreliable, and you don't really want Warlocks in this detachment anyway. Borrowed Vigor gives an Archon plus 2 attacks in melee. Sure, take it on your first Archon, why not? Morbid Might lets you reroll wounds in melee for a Succubus. It is a mark of how staggeringly weak the Succubus datasheet is at her nominal role of being a melee threat that even with full wound rerolls, she's not even that scary. The stratagems though, this is the main course. Pall of Dread lets you sticky an objective when one of your unit dies. This is a fantastic ability wherever it turns up because it makes it really hard to flip primary scoring with shooting, and that's doubly true here because of the potential ability to use Lethal Intent to move something onto an objective as well, potentially securing 2 objectives against armies that don't want to get close to you. Macabre Resilience gives one of your units -1 to be wounded. Again, this is just a generally good ability to have, though slightly weaker than it might be in some armies because nothing eligible has a natural toughness higher than 4. Emissaries of Ynnead gives one of your infantry units rerolls of 1 to hit in melee, or full rerolls if they're below starting strength. This ranges from fine to excellent given how few rerolls this codex has. Parting the Veil gives you a guaranteed fight on death for 2 command points. This is really good with units of Incubi with an Archon, as units fighting on death always count as below starting strength, so you'll get full wound rerolls, and you can use the Archon to discount the stratagem. Also remember, this works on any Ynnead unit, so if you absolutely need to, you could even use it on the Incarn. Soulsight gives the unit both ignore cover and lethal hits on its shooting attacks. There are quite a few possible targets which have one or the other of these already, but this ends up making Dire Avengers look pretty interesting in this detachment, even without being able to take a sermon. 10 with an Autarch is a fairly spectacular amount of damage with this, and if the opponent makes a poor choice in dealing with them, they then benefit from the next one as well. It's also surprisingly good on Fire Prisms too. Death Answers Death gives you an out-of-phase shooting action with a unit that lost 1 or more models during your opponent's shooting phase. If you can set up a situation where your opponent doesn't wipe an entire unit immediately, this can be amazing. Most notably, you can pair it with the Fade Back Agile Maneuver, and that gives you another reason to set up Guardian Defenders with a Farseer and a D-Cannon. More often you'll be able to fade back from shooting threats to take shots on melee units preparing to charge and punish an opponent for trying to whittle you down. Your game plan with Ynnead pivots around Lethal Intent, an incredibly powerful move that lets you either defend your assets and objectives extremely well, or launch incredibly swift strikes into the heart of the foe as the situation demands. In most games, it's probably a bit of both. You stack that with the fact that you get better access to cheap board control than the other Asuryani detachments, a few deadly hammer blows, and an additional option to lock in an objective with Pall of Dread makes it ultra challenging for a foe to unpick your plans. With this detachment, your biggest concern is often going to be how you can drop below starting strength without losing an entire unit, something which can be a tall task for an army as fragile as the Aeldari. It's also an army that generally wants a few disposable units to trigger Lethal Intent or act as cheap objective holders which can use Pall of Dread. Now let's look at the strengths and weaknesses. You've got an unparalleled ability to react in your opponent's turn with the Detachment rule. Great melee pressure tools to keep the opponent on the back foot. Thanks to the Drukhari, you've also got access to a pool of additional units providing cheap, flexible board control. Now unfortunately, Ynnead characters lock you out of taking Phoenix Lords and other epic heroes. This detachment also requires sacrificing units to get maximum value, so it's going to take a careful balance of finding out when to strike. There's also a high skill ceiling, as it has a heavy demand on battle focus to keep your existing units alive, requiring expert planning. We may not be fully going back to the horrors of 8th edition, but watching what top players can do with Ynnead once the optimal list has been sussed out is gonna be crazy. It's an army with even stronger movement and melee options than most other Aeldari get, and that's an army that already has a lot of those. This is a detachment that's going to reward skill with positioning and movement more than most. If that wasn't enough goth elf malarkey for you, head on over to goonhammer.com and learn how you can become your local problematic elf player. While you're at it, consider supporting us on Patreon. I've been Dead Guy McPaleale, posting from Beyond the Veil. Thanks for watching.